Chapter 18. Diggin' tomatoes? Billy's voice startled me. Aren't you confused? He said, scratching his grubby head. Just stupid. I overwatered and the tomatoes from this plant split open. I explained Mr. Tiller's theory. Billy squatted and poked his fingers into the soil. This is still damp. Is it supposed to be? It should be dry by now. I have to find out if all the plants got as soaked as this one. Here, he said, reaching for the spade. It still surprised me when he offered to help. He walked a few paces and dug into another spot. Stuff's dry here. I'd say you're safe. Wow, thanks, I said. If he had been a girl, I'd have hugged him. He shrugged, but he didn't turn away. He made no move to leave, just put his hands in his pockets and stood there. You don't look happy. Thinking about Scott's dad? He asked me. Billy didn't look so grimy when you looked right into his eyes when he let you. Yes, I wondered how Billy had heard. It wasn't I wonder how Billy had heard. It wasn't quite as bad as I had imagined. Mr. Walker wasn't dead, but he was missing in action. We can fix your watering problem, Billy said. We can? I'll be back in a jiffy. Wait here. Well, now, where would I be going? I said, and we both smiled, remembering the day he had found Old Wolf. Billy never did anything in a jiffy except maybe throw his fists, but he might be back. Andy, Maria, and Ellie showed up, looking glum. They too had heard about Scott's father. He'll probably stay with his mom today, said Andy. If it was my mom, she wouldn't let me out of her sight. I drew their attention away. I told them about the split tomatoes and what Mr. Tiller had said about uneven watering. The tomatoes were theirs too, so I had to tell them. I didn't have to mention the so-called secret weapon. It hadn't made any difference anyway. I didn't mention Billy either. He might not even come back. He did, though, dragging an old garden hose, a short board, and a hammer. He stopped when he saw the other kids. He looked at his stuff, must have decided it was too much to drag back, and kept coming. Billy's going to help us, I said. What's he got? Said Andy. I'm not sure. The kids hung back. Billy didn't say much. He just went to work. He stretched a section of hose over the board. Where'd you get this? I asked him. Just got it. Hold it tight, he said. He punched holes in the hose, tapping a very thin nail with the hammer. The holes have to be tiny and lots of them, he said. It's called a soaker hose. By now the others were leaning over us, curious. Are you sure the water will come through? I asked. I'm sure, and it seeps right down to the roots. He looked up over our shoulders and cocked his head. Someone was coming. Scott pedaled up, braked his bike slowly, and straddled in, leaning on the handlebars. The sprouts shifted uneasily, glancing from Scott to Billy. I wondered if Billy would turn and walk away. Billy was made of better stuff than that. He held a hand out to Scott. Bad deal about your dad, he said, which was as close as he could come to saying he was sorry. Thanks. Scott shook hands, looking off to the side. I couldn't say it either. I hoped Scott would see it in my face. Not knowing what else to say, I said, Look what Billy did. The soaker hose gave us all something to talk about. Billy, Scott, me, and the other sprouts. I was thinking how that had never happened. Pretty soon we were all explaining Mr. Tiller's theory to Scott, and Billy was explaining how the soaker hose worked. How did you know about this? I asked him. For once, he told me. Learned it from my grandma. The best part is you don't have to stand and hold the hose. I wonder why Mr. Burt never told us about this. Huh. Why does he do anything? All he has to do is his garden. I reckon he'd water it with a teaspoon if he had to. I laughed, picturing that. The others laughed with me, even Scott. We strung the hose along a row of tomatoes that turned the water on to test it. Just remember it all goes to the roots, so don't overdo it, said Billy. Thanks, Billy, I said. Good going, Riggs, said Andy. Nice work, said Scott. Sure, said Billy. He tapped Scott's arm with a loose fist. Your dad's going to be okay, he said. Then he ambled off. Scott stayed after the others left. I guess he knew I would come closest to knowing how he really felt. Thanks for helping with our garden, he said. Sure. Everyone over the mumps? So far. Cassie didn't get them. How's your mom? I left her in the garden. She says it keeps her sane. Does she need a soaker hose? We know how to make one now. I don't think so. She likes to hold the hose. I watched her face sometimes when she's watering. She's kind of smiling, like when she reads Dad's letters. What she needs is a cure for weeds. She was about to give up before the Sprouts came over. Does she believe the Victory Gardens helped the war effort? With all her heart. I wish I did. After Jeff went away, I thought if we just had enough good tomatoes and string beans and stuff, he'd come back. Scott smiled. Well, not quite. We talked about the gardens. I wondered out loud if it helped Mr. Burt to know his garden was being tended. It gives him something to think about anyway, said Scott. Sometimes you have to have something to think about. Scott was wiser than most boys. Most were just ornery. By the way, what did you say to Allie about that snake? I asked him. Oh, that. I told her what my dad told me before he went away. He said, the being scared is worse than what you're scared of. You and your mama remember that while I'm gone. We're trying to now. Maybe he's already shown up somewhere. He towed his kickstand up, ready to go. He squeezed the handlebars and pedaled away. Who was worse off, Scott or Billy? I thought I knew. I looked at Billy's soaker hose again. An idea crept into my mind.